So yeah, I come from central Ukraine, which is a place that is very dry. So until about last year, I didn't know what peat actually feels like until I was on a trip in Skye on the island in Scotland, and I had a luxury of laying down in a blanket bog and just finding myself totally struck by the way that it feels and the way that I could feel the movements of other people who were there with me, how the peat was carrying through these movements and how I could feel them coming through even though they were meters away. And I just found that such a magical encounter with peat, the first one, and very magical that I had. So in the context of this climate and ecological crisis that we find ourselves in today, I'm wondering how might people and peat interact in the future? But back to the reason why I'm here today is that both Nick and I, well, the reason that Nick invited me is that both of us are involved in a project called Climate Ready Can, which is a project between Adaptation Scotland, from where I'm speaking today, which is a program managed by an organization called Sniffer, and we are looking at the way that communities, organizations can adapt to the climate changes. There is the Loch and Trust, who is one of the local partners of this project. There is the Galloway Gelns Landscape Partnership and the Dumfries and Galloway City Council as well. And the kind of the key premise of the project is understanding what climate change means for the Lochcan area and what can people do about it. So we have been working together for about a year now, and actually met for the first time only in August in person. And what we've done in this past year is essentially trying to understand what climate change means locally in the area of Lochcan. And we've done a number of things in the past couple of months. We've done these sort of whirlwinds conversations with different groups where we try to unpack climate change, looking at how it changed in the past and what are the trends and projections for the future, how the climate is changing, and also what does unadapted and what adapting place looks like. And I suppose where we're coming from with that perspective of adaptation and the need to adapt is that I think it's probably going to be not a surprise to anyone here in the room, in the virtual room, in the Zoom room, that that we currently find ourselves in a situation where, due to the past and the current emissions of the greenhouse gases, we find ourselves locked to a certain amount of heating that is already locked in system. So even if we were totally cut off all the greenhouse gas emissions today, which is not happening at the moment, we would still find ourselves dealing with the changes that are already locked in, and sense the need to figure out what those changes are for the places and how we can adapt to them. And what that means, I guess, for Scotland is that we're seeing here warmer and wet winters and also hotter and drier summers, and that, to the topic of our today's gathering, the peat, that of course is not great news for the peat. We know that peat burns because of this hot and drier summers much more, and that damaged peat is just not a great thing for the peat itself and for the ecosystems and the people around it. But back to the Climate Ready Can is what I'm interested in doing is thinking beyond kind of these more obvious immediate implications of climate change, like flooding or overheating, and also looking at a more nuanced and interconnected ways that we find ourselves affected by climate change, not necessarily linking that to climate change. For example, looking at the housing and looking at the way that houses that are becoming more damp because they can't cope with the amounts of rainfall and dry enough, then create unhealthy environments for people to live in, with the mold, a very widespread problem in Scotland, as I learned having moved here 3 years ago. Then we find ourselves seeing how climate change manifests and affects our ability to get around or to travel, whether it's local travel or international travel, the way it affects our nutrition and health in what we're able to eat or what kind of crops or food we're able to grow or not grow, the way that it affects also other important spheres of life, like play, with smaller humans having some of the places where they would like to play not being so safe, perhaps, to play anymore because of the extreme weather and because of the different ways climate change manifests itself. And finally, it's also about the way that climate change affects care, and care not only in terms of public health or health sector care, but how does climate change affects our ability to care for each other and for the living beings. And this is where care brings me to a provocation that I would like to share with everyone. Just a second. So if you are kind of following, which I imagine a lot of you are, a conversation around climate change and peatlands, you would hear that often peatlands are being brought up in a conversation as a thing that would help us in the fight against climate change because of peatlands' abilities to store the emissions, to store the greenhouse gases. And what I'm wondering if we can imagine is the kind of future where we can care for the peatlands and see peatlands as creatures, as ecosystems that also do the important work of care as webs of life that maintain life within it, and the web of life that creates environments that are caring for ourselves as humans and other living beings that live around it. So kind of seeing peatland as a local caregiver. And this is where creative practices also come in as a hugely important vehicle in shifting our perceptions and ways that we relate to each other and to the environment. And this brings me to just sharing one of the final points, that adaptation is not only about flood barriers and all the technical solutions, although that's part of it, and that's also very important, but where creative practices, I think, come in and can help us rethink and reimagine the way that we think about relating with each other and with our more than human, other than human neighbors and cohabitants in different way. And this is why I'm so excited about Nick co-hosting this sessions in a way that brings together artists and climate scientists to imagine different kinds of ways to relate to each other. And I think that's fantastic. And I regret that I can't be there in person. And the question that I would like to invite everyone to think through as we go along this event, and we're going to come back to it at the end as well, is what can you as an individual, you as a group of friends, as a community, do to help peats have a healthy and livable habitat in the future climate. So that's my final invitation for us to think through tonight. Thank you, and I will hand over back to Nick.
Thank you, Arina. I think Arina's working with us on creating something quite different, a different way of looking at climate around the loch. I think the adaptation thing that we're looking at there is so critical. As Arina slightly said, there's a lot of climate change is locked in. No matter what we do now, there's a certain amount of pretty awkward weather is going to hit us, and there's nothing we can do about that. So adapting our communities and adapting our way of life to that is as essential as actually the mitigation to try and stop it getting worse. So have a look at the question that Arina is going to pose, and those on Zoom, if you could maybe start chucking things in on the chat, it'd be great to hear from you. And in the audience, we'll have a sort of conversation in the audience as well. So I'm not going to hang around in front of the camera for too long. We've got someone else about to step up who's well known to the community in this part of the world. Emily Taylor works for the Clarion House. She's a peatland expert. She's super enthusiastic about peat. In fact, all she's ever I hear is peat. I see her in peat bogs, dipping into peat, lifting peat, making things out of peat. So she's an amazing person who's going to come and tell you why it's so important to look after the peat. And some incredible work the Carbon Centre is doing at the moment to restore our peatlands. Emily, if you'd like to come forward.
Great, perfect. Well, thank you very much. Okay, so my name's Emily Taylor. I work for the Peat Carbon Centre, and yes, I am all things peaty. So I have a background in peatlands and carbon science. I also have a background in farming and farm conservation, and I've kind of brought the two together, and now I do a lot of work with land managers doing peatland restoration across Scotland, actually. So we'll come on to that. So I've done quite a few of these peatland talks now, and I've talked quite a lot about the technical side of peatlands. I'm, a scientist. I think of spreadsheets and numbers and stats and all the rest of it. But tonight, I really do want to pick up on what Irina was talking about, and peatlands and people. What I've come to realise, where we're getting with peatland restoration, the amazing work that we're now doing is down to people, and peatlands need people. So really, the title of my talk tonight is Peatlands. Oh, this isn't working. Nick, let's have a go. Sorry, we're just a technical problem with the. Yeah, if you could. James, you need to be back on. Is that working? So my peatlands dark and dreary, which is kind of how we all imagine them, to dynamic and dazzling. Yes, really, and actually often all on the same day. If you've ever been out with people, which I think a lot of people here have been on people. But it's really about thinking about peatlands, kind of the misconceptions and the kind of bad reputation they have, and turning that about and realising that we all need to know about peatlands. So first, I want to take everybody, Zoom people, room people, on a bit of a journey. I want you to imagine being on a big open expanse of peatbog. So think about it in your head. What does it look like? How does it feel? Well, I bet you, oh no, this is not working now. Can you skip on a slide, please? Oh, there we go. I bet you think it looks like this. Okay. I actually read a really positive news article about peatlands a few years ago. I think it was in The Guardian. And they used an image like this to illustrate this fantastic peatland, which is ridiculous, but this is what people imagine. And people imagine walking across this area, getting wet up to their knees, they've maybe forgotten their wellies, thinking they need to put a waterproof jacket on. And then they think about the horrible weather that comes in, the wet weather, the pouring wet rain, the driving rain, horizontal rain actually, the blowing winds, the gales. But then that starts to disappear and you get that light drizzle. That's when the midges come out. And it's horrendous. And you think, oh, I can't stay here any longer. You zip up all your jackets, you put on at least 2 hats, you try and run away from the midges. So you try and find a route off the peatbog and you get stuck somewhere like this. And then you can't get out of it. It's so slippery, you keep sliding back in. So it takes you hours to get off the peatbog. Eventually you manage to get home and have a lovely hot bath. And this is really what people think. People just think it's mad people like me, us scientists, that go out on peatbogs and we love peatbogs. But actually it's not. There's loads of people out there on our peatbogs looking after them, managing them, restoring them as we speak, which I'll talk a wee bit about. Now, peatlands are really important to understand and respect and support. They are described as one of the most important ecosystems on the whole planet. They store more carbon than all the above ground biomass. So all your vegetation, all your forests, they're absolutely fundamental to our climate because they lock away so much carbon. And we need to keep that carbon in the ground. We can't let any more carbon in the form of greenhouse gases reach our atmosphere. So we have to look after our peatlands. But many of our peatlands are in a degraded state. So there's lots of work now going on to think about how we manage our peatlands and how we actively restore them as well. And so we're now seeing in Scotland sites like this, little diggers, little 8-ton diggers like this, tracking across this huge expanses near Achnasheen in the Highlands, and actually doing restoration, blocking up those ditches, restoring those eroding peat banks. It's quite amazing. So if you see a digger way up in the distance, a really random part of a hill, they're probably doing peatland restoration, which is fantastic. So a bit about peatlands then, put it more kind of in a local context. Well, you know, in a European kind of context, we have a lot of deep peat in Scotland. And what's really amazing, in Dumfries and Galloway, we have a huge area of peat. We have lots and lots of blanket bogs, really deep areas of peat. And we have really important lowland raised bogs as well. So really important habitats that have been recognised internationally for years and years actually. But it's only recently that we're talking about peatlands in a climate change context, thinking about their carbon store. Now, so we talk about peatlands and carbon, but really, you know, what is it we're talking about? Well, here's a peat tag, and what it shows beautifully is peat. And peat is really fundamentally organic carbon. It's been formed since the last ice age from the really slow decomposition and compressing of organic matter of all the plants that have been growing. And it's built up really, really, really slowly over 12,000 years. So we have this huge layer of organic carbon. That's what our peatland is. Here's another good example. Again, you can see, lots and lots of peat here, really deep. But what's really striking is just how quickly it can erode. So it takes thousands of years to build and form, but it can take, one terrible day of weather to get a big block of that peat washing off. So actually, it's something quite critical to restore. We need to work on these sites quickly and effectively and keep that carbon locked away, stabilise these areas. So here we have another example, and this is kind of quite representative of a lot of sort of peatlands that you'll see. You might see exposed bits of bare peat like that. But what you often see is quite uniform looking vegetation, all kind of same sort of height, same sort of structure, same sort of colours. But actually, this is where the dynamic bit comes in. Peatlands are amazing. They're a system in themselves. They are really dynamic. The processes in a peatland are extraordinary. This here is a diagram that just illustrates all the different pathways that carbon can be exchanged in a peatland. So you can get carbon dioxide absorbed by the peatland because of the vegetation through photosynthesis. You can get respiration of vegetation, you lose carbon dioxide. Methane can be produced naturally by a peat bog as well. You can lose carbon through water pathways, that very, very brown bath water, that's dissolved organic carbon, and particular organic carbon, I would imagine too. And that was the bath, that wasn't my bath, that was my dog's bath, by the way, just to clarify. But there's loads of different ways you can take in carbon, lose carbon. And all of these processes, if they're all working in balance, will eventually lead to the sequestration and storage of carbon. However, if these processes are out of sync, you're probably going to be losing carbon. And what underpins these processes is really the water table, the hydrology. Peat bog's wet, we know that. A peat bog needs to be wet for all these processes to be working in balance. So a lot of the restoration work we do, it's first and foremost stabilisation of bare peat areas, stop the eroding, but it's about restoring the hydrology and making sure the water table, so the height of the water within the peat body itself, is at the right sort of level and doesn't have these huge drawdowns in sort of dry springs and summers. So, peatlands then in a climate context, yes, we can talk about peatlands helping mitigate climate change by keeping carbon in the ground, stopping the release of carbon emissions to the atmosphere. In Scotland, we reckon about 140 years worth of our annual emissions are stored in our peatlands. So you imagine even just a small percentage of those peatlands degrading, that's going to totally, affect our targets and our ambitions for our greenhouse gas emissions. But we need to think about, as we discussed earlier, our climate is changing. So we also need to consider peatlands in a changing climate context, and we believe that if a peatland is functioning properly, it's going to be able to adapt to what's coming. Because remember, peatlands are not just carbon store, they are sources of our water. They underpin our activities, our agricultural activities. They are part of our landscape. They are really important for biodiversity and some of our rarest species. So we need to make sure they're there for all of these different reasons, not just carbon. So we really have to think about peatlands in terms of functionality and resilience. If they're functioning well, they're going to be more resilient to what's coming. And everything that it underpins will be more resilient as a result. So back to peatlands and people. So what is our relationship in the past, present, and, as we touched on earlier, the future? So, peatlands have been heavily modified by us, by people. This is an example area of peatlands, and all these blue lines are artificial drains. Somebody has gone out there and drained the peatlands, and my goodness me, what an incredible feat of work here to do this. And the intention here was to try and improve the ground for agricultural purposes, because that's what we thought was the right thing to do. And yes, we gave out government grants until fairly recently to do this. We now know, of course, that wasn't the right thing to have done. But look at all those drains just in that one area. And then look to the left here, there's a big bit of deep peat in here that's now being covered in conifers. So there's been the associated drainage and ground preparation with that as well. So these are heavily modified peatlands. So yes, we have had an impact on peatlands in the past. But now what are we doing? Well, we're going back and restoring them. We are learning how to do restoration, and we are learning every year what's working well, where we should be doing it, how we go about it. And more people are driving these kind of machines and doing the restoration. So in Scotland, we have an amazing project called Peatland Action. That's direct government funding for peatland restoration, and we've restored well over 25,000 hectares now since like 2013 in Scotland. So an exponential increase in the rate of restoration across Scotland. And we've done loads of projects in Galloway as well. And it's down to the guys that drive the digger. So this is a digger up in Lewis, and he was restoring an old abandoned peat bank that wasn't being cut anymore, but it still had that eroding edge, and he was down with his digger tamping down the edge. It's thanks also to intrepid people like this. These are some of the Peatland Action Project officers from across Scotland, but also project officers from other peatland projects from across the UK. These guys all specialise in bare peat restoration, so we were out on a site looking at a bare eroding site, figuring out how enough we're going to restore it in the worst of weathers. But it was fundamental to that dynamic knowledge sharing that's going on all the time. We've also got all the people who are starting to get interested in peatland restoration as well, because they're starting to see that it might not only be the thing they should be doing, but also might actually fundamentally help what they're trying to do with their ground. So this is a training course I was running up Achenshin in the Highlands, and here we have contractors, so machine operators, we have land managers, we have a gillie here, we have a gamekeeper, stalkers, and we have some consultants as well, ecological consultants, all learning about peatland restoration. And that really good mix of people, again, knowledge, backgrounds, and understanding is great at these kind of courses. Again, here we are in Shetland, discussing how to restore some areas up there too. So look at all the people it takes to start thinking about peatland restoration. And we have these amazing people doing this, and it's great. I mean, crazy people like this. This is Maz, who I work with, who will jump into every hole and drain on a peat bog to try and understand the peat bog better. We need people like that. We need the managers that help manage the deer populations and other management regimes on our open upland areas. It's down to people. But I think more and more, we're recognising all these people coming together. We're starting to see amazing results. Now, this is Silver Flow. This is a Ramsar site. It's an internationally recognised wetland site of huge international importance. And this is in Dumfries and Galloway, in the Galloway Gelns area. And what's amazing here is in the large image, hopefully you'll see some very faint lines. Okay, they're artificial drains. But see the zoom in image there on the bottom right? You can see all those little peat dams, all those little dots. We're now starting to see our restoration activities on Google Earth images, which is amazing. And those little peat dams look like little ditches on those drains. We're starting to see that. It's amazing. However, I was reflecting for a couple of weeks ago that, you know, I have hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of brown peat bogs. I have hardly any pictures of people on the peat bogs. And I feel it's great having the contractors, land managers, the scientists, policymakers even interested in peatlands, but actually everybody needs to be interested in peatlands, which is a really hard thing to get the general public enthusiastic about peatlands when we imagine midges and rain and horrible squelching and brown baths. So this is why we developed a project called Peatland Connections. And this was off the back of working with an amazing artist, Kate Foster, an environmental artist, and she went to Galloway Gelns with the idea of a peat cultures project. So we got together, we teamed up with me, the kind of scientific background, Kate with her artistic background, and we got different people out onto peat bogs. And we started talking about peatlands in a different way. And it was really quite challenging for me because I'm, you know, a scientist and I think in a certain way and I engage in a certain way and I talk to certain audiences. What I realised is working with an artist, they engage in a different way that you can't even prescribe. You don't even know where it's going to go, but they can talk to people in a whole different way, which is really exciting. And it kind of led to crazy things like this. This was the first ever sphagnum splat. Sphagnum moss is that really important wet moss you get growing in a peat bog. And this was actually in response to the big climate marches that are happening in Glasgow and London. We felt we want to do something positive, we want to do something Galloway. So we got permission from Forestry Land Scotland to get a group of people together and their dogs dressed up. It was crazy. We had a brass band playing peat bog music that they composed. And we marched up to a peatland site and we gathered handfuls of sphagnum as we went. And this is on the National Forest Estates, the ground managed by Forestry Land Scotland. And they'd already done some peatland restoration, which is great peatland restoration site. But we marched to that site with our banners, collecting sphagnum as we went. And then when we got to that restoration site, we splattered the sphagnum over the site. And that was a really kind of symbolic thing. It was fun. People got messy. They saw what sphagnum was, but also they seeded that bog with sphagnum fragments, and hopefully that will grow. And the site is responding really, really well. It's a site called South Dee up near Clarion House. And that was amazing. The energy that was there, and it was brilliant. But no funding required, nothing like that. It was just people coming together, thinking about Peatlands in a different way, and engaging them in a different way. So this is what we want to do more of with Peatland Connections. And Jane, who's sitting in back there on a laptop, Jane is our project officer who's running Peatland Connections, and we want to do more activities like that. We want to get communities involved, we want to get scientists involved, we want to get land managers involved, talking about peatlands and thinking about management. And particularly for this area here, so this is Clarion House, sort of north of New Galloway. This is actually a really important area of kind of deep peat throughout here. But that peat's been managed for forestry, it's been managed for biodiversity, that bit wasn't planted because it's recognised as really important habitats. It's managed for farming. Obviously, we've got a hydro scheme there, we've got the Southern Way that runs through it, so there's loads of things going on there. We want to think about peatland restoration and management and how it might help all those different activities, and how those activities might need to change what they're doing to try and support the peatlands a bit better. And already Forestland Scotland restored this 22-hectare site here called South Dee, which is brilliant forest bog restorations. We've taken off the conifer trees, we've blocked off all the drains, we've reprofiled the site, and we've got bog vegetation back there again. So a huge open bit of bog once again back in this basin. So I hope that's been kind of really taking peatlands from that horrible, dreary image and kind of reimagine and understanding them much better, that they're super important, really cheesy photographs, but they're in our hands. We can get involved. We should be getting involved. We should understand them. They're on our doorstep. And you're more than welcome to come to our next sphagnum splat that we hope to plan in the near future. And you too can chuck some sphagnum onto the bog and help it on its road to recovery. But before I finish, I just want to introduce Kerry Morrison. So Kerry is an environmental artist that we've kind of built a relationship on with her love of peat and the Pendle Hill peat project she'll talk about as well. And the links there, and working with somebody like Kerry, who's an environmental artist, is amazing, because you can't even imagine the things that we could go on to do with Peatland Connections, the kind of events that we might hold in the future. But it's shown me that we need to talk to lots of different people in lots of different ways, and we can use music, arts, culture to do that, as well as the science and the kind of training courses I run with digger drivers, for example. But great, I'll leave it there. I'll hand over to Nick and bring on to Kerry, but thank you very much. If you've got any questions, I'll go and sit in the chat room on Zoom, and I think we've got a question session at the end here anyway. Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. As introduced, Kerry Morrison's up next, an environmental artist, standing next to me now. I may have to adjust the camera for her because she's going to be showing some stuff off, so she could be a bit more room. So just bear with me 1 minute, and we'll get the camera adjusted.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here, and thanks so much, Nick, for inviting me. So hello to everyone in the room, and then hello to everybody at Zoom. And thanks, Emily, for that talk. I love listening to you talk about peat and peat bogs. And I've been working with like somebody who does similar stuff to Emily down in Lancashire. And likewise, I love being in her company because she just comes out with all these facts. I mean, when you were talking about how much carbon the peat bogs store, am I right in thinking that the peatland of the world is just 3%? Yeah. So 3% of the land holds in more carbon than all of the forests.
It's the same as 8% of carbon.
I mean, it's just some of the things just kind of blow my mind. Okay, so, we're there. Okay, I never know how to use these things. So I'm an artist. I'm an environmental artist, social environmental artist. So I work with people in environment, and I've been working on a project in the far east of Lancashire, at a place called Pendle Hill. And the project itself is a landscape partnership project, much as Galloway Gelns is a landscape partnership project. It's called the Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership. And it was one that was kind of fronted by the Forest of Bowland area of outstanding natural beauty. The area of the landscape partnership is the purple line that you can see. So that's the extent. So much, much, much smaller than the Galloway Gelns area. And in the centre of that, where the red marker is, that's Pendle Hill. So In Situ, by the way, is an arts organisation that I co-founded some 10 years ago, and they're one of the partners in the Landscape Partnership. And I've been working as an artist through In Situ and then collaborating with the peat restoration guys in the Landscape Partnership. Okay, I'm doing the same issue, I think. I'm pointing at the wrong place. Okay, which one am I pressing? That one. Thank you. So let me introduce you to Pendle Hill. Pendle Hill is an iconic hill in the East of Lancashire. That's Pendle Hill. And Pendle Hill is known for, particularly famous for, a couple of things. One is the so-called Pendle Witches, some of you might have heard about, which is 3 women who were persecuted, accused of being witches, and finally hanged. And that was a 9-year-old, her mother and her granddaughter. So they were from Pendle Hill. The other thing it's really well known for is being the birthplace of Quakerism. So George Fox, the founder of the Quaker movement, apparently was on the top of Pendle Hill and had an epiphany. So Pendle Hill not only is like a lump in the landscape that really stands out, it's also got these kind of like historical, cultural and religious roots as well. So this is Pendle Hill. And every year, some 300,000 people walk up Pendle Hill. And I think that's a conservative number because on days I've been there, and one day I'm going to talk about, more than 170 went up in one day over a 3-hour period. So I think it's kind of a conservative number. And people seem to go up in all kinds of weather. Okay, and they walk up to one side. So what I was kind of asked to do within the Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership was talk about, was to work with peat restoration ecologists and nuts and peat, and that's because on top of Pendle Hill, the summit is degraded peat. It's a degraded peatland landscape, and this is what it looks like, or what it did look like, and this is how it looked when I first saw it some 10 years ago, and I thought that that was what the landscape looked like. I thought that was a peat landscape, and I thought it was stunning because it appealed to my kind of artist sort of aesthetic, because there's something quite interesting about that. So this is what it was like, and really, this is what I'm going to get off. Really, peat shouldn't look like that. So I shouldn't be able to do this. Bring along a load of peat. I shouldn't be able to get to it. And when we were asked earlier, does anyone know what peat feels like? What we heard about was what a healthy peat bog feels like and how it moves. But this is what peat from a degraded landscape feels like, and I'll pass that around. And actually, what it should have, thanks to Emily for bringing this, is a load of this on top of it, so we shouldn't see it. I am going to pass that around, if once I hit a feel of that. And this evening, I'm also kind of dressed like a healthy peat bog. So not the most glamorous of outfits, but those of you who can see, and probably, sorry Zoom people, you might not be able to, but so I'm dressed in kind of a heathery green jumper and different layers of green. But if you kind of look down all those layers at the bottom underneath that is brown. And that's the bit that you shouldn't see. So I'm kind of representing a little bit of peat myself. So that's what the top of the landscape is looking like. Loads of peat being washed and blown away, going down the hill, exposing rocks that are being caught up in the peat as well. And people were actually writing, sort of using like graffiti stones, if you like, to write on the peat. And of course, this needed to be restored. And one of the reasons why it was looking like this, got a curious reason why that peat was degraded. Many reasons, some to do with sheep farming, some to do with people and footfall. But interestingly, on Pendle Hill, what they used to do up until the 1980s was use it as a space to test and to detonate bombs. And the reason they used it is because nobody valued this landscape. It had no purpose. And interestingly, or even more interestingly, between the two world wars, the British government allowed the Germans to test their bombs on our landscape too. So it's so there was like these big pits up there, and those are like the starting points of some of this major erosion. And like I say, it went on until the 80s. So undetonated bombs were still being taken out until the 80s to be blown up. So now, as Emily pointed out, now we kind of realise just how important these landscapes are, and just how important they are for holding in carbon dioxide, and more so that they're also these unique habitats that have particular specialised species that will only live in these landscapes. There is a drive to actually restore them, which is totally brilliant. And so here is one of those little digger drivers. I don't envy them. They are up in all weathers, quite lonely. They're up for like hours on end, and the weather can change at the click of a finger. So here this guy is, and he's kind of levelling out the landscape. And there they are, you can see the landscape slowly being levelled. What they've done on Pendle Hill to help restore it and hold the peat in place is they've used coir logs. And the coir logs coir is like the outside of a coconut. They act as dams. So the peat, sort of as it's flowing down, hits those coir dams and starts to level itself out a bit. There's other ways of doing this. Sarah Robinson, who I've been working with, works on a lot of peat restoration across the AOB area. And she's also worked with contractors who use old Hessian sacks filled with sheep's wool. And here you can see what the dogs are doing. So they're helping that landscape re-wet. So that's part of the process, is re-wetting the landscape. And then also, once you've got your peat kind of flattened out in a better condition, you need to bring back that layer of vegetation, because that's what holds it all in place, and that's what creates the new layer of peat. So that is really important. And within the Pendle Hill Landscape Project, much of this work has been done by volunteers. But they need more. They need more hands. Volunteers are absolutely fantastic, but there's only so much they can do when you're talking about large restoration projects. I've got one to say. So the other thing they've been doing is cutting back the heather on healthy landscapes and collecting the heather brash, which is full of seeds. There's some heather brash, and then they've been spreading that on the bare peat as well. And what this is all in bags, ready to be taken to other parts of where the landscape where it's bare peat. And at this point, I kind of want to throw in a quote by environmental artist and activist Gustav Metzger, who I think is fantastic. And this quote is, "Art throughout its history for thousands of years has always been interacting with nature. There's no art without nature. So what can art do? What is the artist's task?" And I think that's something that's important for us all to ask all the time, if we're artists or even if we're not. What is our task and what can we do? Well, for me on this project, my task was to communicate the peat restoration process to people living in and around Pendle Hill, and also to communicate the value of peat. Now, sometimes that's quite a challenging thing to do, because most people, their connection with peat is to do with wanting to put on a few tomato plants. And that's not what we're trying to promote. In fact, actually, quite the opposite. So it's like, how do you connect people to this kind of brown, sort of soggy stuff when we can see it, or the stuff that's so far beneath our feet we can't see it? So that was kind of the challenge that was set for me, which I was super excited about. And one of the things that I decided to do is actually kind of make use of all of those people that go up Pendle Hill, and see if we can get those people involved in actually sowing seeds. So I set about a project which is called Sowing in Time. And as part of Sowing in Time, I've made a series of bags that tell a story. Now, the story of the bags is, this is the bare peat. I might have to hold this up to Zoom audience, I'm not sure. So this is the bare peat. Bare peat, not good, we don't want it. So bare peat is then covered. This is one of the things they use in Pendle, on Pendle Hill, something called geotex. Again, it's a coir material that's woven, and that sits on top of the peat, and then that temporarily holds it in place whilst the seeds are sown and allowing that vegetation to come back to create that thick, deep carpet that we need. So the bag tells a story, and I thought it'd be interesting to take that kind of process of sowing to various places around the hill. So I did. So I sat and I publicly sowed and I talked to people, anybody that turned up. And so I create kind of like focal points that focus people in what it is. And the thing people say is, ooh, what's that? What are you up to? So automatically, I can talk about peat. And I took it, sorry, that was myself in Nelson Park, Victoria Park, sorry, in Nelson. This is outside the ice cream shop in Downham, which is a little village. And here I'm joined by Peter Driver, who's an artist that was visiting in situ for that week, and a local woman, Denise, who is a member of the local WI, saw me there, asked if she could join in. Of course she could. So we were sat sewing, the three of us. This is a lovely lady called Christine, who happened to be volunteering with the Pendle Hill Landscape Partnership folk, and she was doing scything, meadow scything, and she decided that she'd actually rather sit and sew with me. So she came and sewed with me, and this is in Barley Village Green. And I was also joined by Hussein Hanif, who's from Briarfield, which is where In Situ is, and he's somebody kind of picked up a few years ago through doing artwork. So we were sewing there. This is myself, well, I'm taking the photograph, obviously, Hussein, Peter, and a young woman called Abby, who's working as an intern for In Situ. We were sewing outside in the park, got rained off, moved inside the community cafe, and we were sewing there. And I just thought I'd show you a little bit of Hussein's detail, neatness. That's Hussein. And this is one of my favourite places. This is the Clarion House, which is in Pendle, just at the bottom of Pendle Hill, if you like. And that's a whole story in itself, which I'm happy to tell people about at another day. So there I was, sitting and telling people the story of the bags, and I managed to engage or talk to on a one-to-one with over 100 people for the few days I was doing that. And as an aside, I also sat with Jane here outside the cat stand, but I'm not showing you that slide because it's out of context of it with the presentation. So in total, 251 bags were created. Each one is numbered, so it's a limited edition artwork, not signed because many hands were making them. So limited edition artwork, and then inside each one there's some goodies. So the task then was to get people to carry them up the hill. So I arranged them on the dry stone walling at the bottom of the hill. So creating a temporary installation that attracted people's attention. So people come out to me like, ooh, what's this? It was filmed, the whole thing was filmed. So we had a sign up which was telling people that filming was in progress. And we told them a little bit about the story of the bag, what was happening on top of the hill. Would they be so kind, please, to take up a packet of seeds? And in the packet of seeds, there is sheep's fescue, common bent, cotton grass, and heather seeds. I think there was one other in it as well. So we're asking people, would they be so kind? And of course, they were. So on that day, we gave out 170 bags. It was quite a day because when the petrol thing started, so there was fewer people than usual. But nonetheless, 170 bags. And not everyone took one because some people with families said no, we'll take one for the whole family. So here's a local couple taking their bags. Most people are absolutely thrilled because they love the hill. They want to get involved. They don't know how to get involved. They can't commit to volunteering, but they can do the odd thing here and there. So people were thrilled to actually have that opportunity. These people came up from London, well, they were visiting from London, heard about Pendle Hill and wanted to go up it. And the woman on the right here, has been an environmental activist for years and years and years. She was absolutely thrilled that this was happening. And then she said, but why didn't we do it years ago? Which is always the question, isn't it? So we had people of all ages, from different backgrounds, from different areas across the country, people really excited, taking their bags up the hill, off they go on their steep climb. We asked people if they'd be so kind to wear it across their shoulders so that it could be filmed. Some people were incredibly obliging, and others, they were good, but others less so. So it's kind of a mixed thing. So off they go up the hill, long climb. When they get to the top, they're met by Sarah, and there's Sarah. So that's Sarah Robinson, who's the equivalent of Emily down in Lancashire, if you like, who I've been collaborating with. And she was greeting people, telling them where to sow the seeds. And also what was happening is because people were given little information at the bottom, they had the whole climb to think about what it is they're carrying. What am I carrying? What am I supposed to do with it? What's in there? So when they get to the top, they've got loads of questions. And Sarah was saying to me, never, ever before has she had so many people asking about peat and wanting to know about peat. And she is just, she just is thrilled. And the conversation, she's not telling people about peat, she's responding to questions. And she has all those answers at her fingertips. So, people ask about compost, what can I do? So she's passing all that information on as well. So it's just great. And like I said, people are absolutely thrilled they were doing something. You can see here also the changes in the landscape. This is how it's now starting to look. So it is actually starting to recover. And like I say, people absolutely love just taking part in the project. Now that's a project that engages people who use the hill, who know the hill, who are able to get up the hill. But there's also communities that can't get there for numerous reasons. One of the reasons is there's no local transport. Not everyone has access to cars and transport. Some people can't walk very well, can't get up there. Numerous reasons why people can't access the hill. And we also wanted to reach out to those communities as well. And I, for years and donkeys, I've had a fascination with food that's connected to place. We're talking about earlier, bacon tart, Ecclefeckin, Dundee cake, and I've actually been on pilgrimage to eat food in those places. So for a long time I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a Briarfield bun? Briarfield's very in situ based. And I kind of parked it, thinking time's not right. But when I started working on this project, I just started thinking, oh yeah, Pendle peat pie or Pendle pudding, something there. So I approached a local cook who works in a community cafe, and Andrew Dean, great cook, but also he volunteers for the RSPB. He's an environmentalist, and he used to be a designer in previous life, and he was super keen to get involved. So I kind of told Andrew what the brief is. The brief was to create a pie or a pudding that represents the processes of restoration on the hill. So it's got to have the coir logs, it's got to have brown peat, it's got to have a vegetative surface, it's got to have dampness to it. And he came up with a number of different variations, including a great peat pudding. But we didn't go ahead with the peat pudding because it wasn't quite Lancashire enough. We wanted something that was proper Lancashire, that people of Lancashire could directly connect to. So we went for the pie, the peat pie. And here's myself and Andrew serving up the pie because we needed to get people to test it to see if it was any good. So this is us serving it at a symposium that we did, gosh, almost 3 years ago now, that Emily came to. And this was, so it's a peat symposium, and all the delegates tasted the pies, gave their feedback, we got a good thumbs up. Not quite enough because we thought, okay, we need to take it out to people. So we decided that we would take it to a number of places around the hill, which included Clitheroe, which is Clitheroe Food Market, Food Fair, And again, we asked people for their feedback, and what we were getting in feedback was either a little bit too spicy or not quite spicy enough. So with that being the only feedback, other than, you know, great taste, lovely, we thought this is it, this is the pie we'll go with. And I should just say that the pie is a full vegan pie, because we were also keen on thinking about an alternative pie to a meat pie, a hearty pie, and the message that a vegan, you know, a vegan pie also has, which is like less meat, still also better for the environment. So Pendle Peat pie, what's in the pie and why? So at the base, we've got a brown lentil dal, which represents squidgy peat. And within that, we've got chips, which represent the coir logs. So automatically, we've got a Lancashire delicacy, which is chips and curry. And also it's a fusion, because on the sort of south side of the hill, which is where Nelson and Briarfield are, there's 47% Pakistani heritage community there. So we really wanted a fusion food as well, that was bringing together South Asian and Lancashire. Then above the chips and curry, we have a layer of cream spinach, so it's spinach cream with tofu, and that represents the new layer of plant growth. And then on top of that, we have a pie crust, and that's because if it didn't have a pie crust, it wouldn't be a pie, and if it wasn't a pie, we wouldn't have the alliteration or that Lancashire tradition. And then on top of that pie crust, there's a miso glaze, which represents the retention of water. And here's the pie. So Andrew and I have been serving the pie all different, you know, lots of different places over a period of time now. This is us at the Clarion. But the vision is to get this pie sort of commercially produced and into sort of food outlets across the region. So chip shops, cafes, maybe the odd pub or restaurant if we could, and to find a pie producer, which we did. We found a fantastic woman called Saneb, who ran Pie Mezzanine. She produced this pie, and we took out tasting it. And again, it was all, you know, fantastic. And then COVID hit. And that was a real kick for us, because, as you know, all hospitality closed down. So we'd actually lined up little cafes who were going to take the pie in. And many of those haven't survived COVID, they've gone. And recently I've just heard that Zanab has also had to let go of her business. So she can no longer produce pies, which means that we no longer have a pie producer, which is really difficult for many reasons, not least because feeling for Zanab and her, you know, people who work for her, but also because we've been asked to take 100 pies to the COP, and we haven't got anyone to make the pies, although Andrew said he will, push come to shove. So if anyone knows, anyone who can produce pies in this region, let me know, because it's a shorter distance from here to Glasgow than it is from Lancashire to Glasgow. So yes, so that's where we are with that. Our ambition is still to get it out there, still to get, you know, find another pie manufacturer. We're also now looking at taking it into canteens. So we're working with somebody who's connected to industry in Lancashire, and we're speaking to kitchens, canteen kitchens, to see if they will actually prepare it and it will go on their menu. We're also speaking to pubs, but it is a drag. I've done all that work once and having to do it all over again. And so, yes, and so there's the peat pie, the ingredients in the peat pie. I have some leaflets from peat pie leaflets as well, which have got the recipe on it and how to make it, the method, and some interesting peaty facts, including that if this were actual peat, how many years it would have taken to develop this amount of peat. So you're very welcome. I hope there's one to go around. And yes, thank you very much.
Couple of questions for you. One was, what was the cover on the bag? Was it peat or was it vegan? Because I thought it was peat.
Yes. So that is actually eco-friendly textile paint. It's also an organic cotton bag. Just yes, it's not peat.
Thank you. And there's 2 suggestions as well for winemakers. There's the Water Wee Farm Shop.
Okay, there's some suggestions coming in on chat for winemakers, but I don't think the audience will be able to hear you chatting, Jane. But do you have any questions for the audience? And then we'll, if you want, we'll shout out the other questions before we go forward.
Emily too, yeah?
Yes, yes. Oh, right. Sorry, do you have any questions from the audience for Emily and Terry? One question back there.
Hi. Just looking at the restoration project, I'm wondering what work of mitigation wind farm construction to
So the question is, what mitigation has been done on wind farms to help peatlands?
Yeah, so quite a bit there. I guess this one's for me, Kerry.
Yes.
So wind farms have to do a carbon calculation that takes into account the work that they're doing on peatlands. It's looked at closely as part of the planning application, how they're working in that peat, and they're only borrowing peat or excavating peat where they absolutely have to. There's a lot of post wind farm construction peatland restoration that goes on, and actually some techniques have been pioneered on wind farm sites. So things like wave damming, different types of blocking ditches have been developed on wind farm sites. I think that there's more of a push I'm seeing personally from developers and land managers. It's actually thinking much more about the hydrological units. It's not just necessarily about that lens of deep peat, it's about what goes on around it, trying not to impact hydrology because that's the fundamental thing for functionality. So I think things will be kind of changing going forward, but it's considered. But yes, there's no getting away from the fact we are still seeing wind farms on deep peat areas, but there are moves to try and kind of look at that.
Okay, another question from a guy called Donny Tusk, who's on peat's being used in plant products and import and export. What's your thoughts going forward as to how we move plants around? It's still something which is used by the majority of the horticultural industry and far away with prior care review.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Sarah about this recently, and she said to me that I was quite shocked by, but 3/4 of peat used in horticulture in the UK is used by domestic gardens. I mean, I'd always thought it was to do with food production on a larger scale, but no, it's what we buy and what we use. And so there's a massive contribution we can make by shifting from peat to peat-free composts. Even though those peat-free composts are not brilliant, and even though those peat-free composts are expensive, I think we do need to think about a bigger picture and how we're using them for our potted plants and our patios.
Yeah, I think to add that, going forward, we're not going to see the same levels of peat extraction, certainly in this country, as we've gone down in other countries. But I think globally there's an issue with the commercial use of peat. So these massive polytunnel glass houses, what are they growing? So I'm getting a volume up from Helen at the back there. So what are they growing their vegetables on when they're grown under plastic? Out of the soil? Are they being grown in a grow medium like peat, or is it hydroponics? So I think it's kind of, it goes back to sustainable food production. It goes back to thinking local as well in what we buy and understanding where food is coming from. I think there's a lot that we don't understand. But certainly in this country, we will be seeing a phasing out of commercial peat extraction.
And also seasonally, eating more seasonally, because I'm now used to getting tomatoes all year round. That isn't necessarily what should be doing.
Does the peat extraction on the way to wet
I would imagine so, yeah.
Another question coming in from I think from Lagoons. I can't actually read it, but that's the Steve up wearing masks. But is peat burning and moor burning still legal in Scotland? I think it still is, isn't it?
Yes, it is under the right circumstances. So the Muirburn Code has been reviewed, and it probably will continue to be reviewed going forward as well. But it's about understanding when fire is appropriate, when it isn't, what the indicators for that is. So it's certainly, so it has changed quite recently, the standards of the Muirburn Code, but it is still allowed in certain circumstances.
Okay, there's no more questions coming in at the moment, but we've got Irina sitting. Oh, apologies, someone coming in.
I was asking about yoga, but also wildfires on moorlands and increasing threat. So, how can we prevent wildfires on peaty moorlands?
By doing peatland restoration.
Yeah.
I think this is what's interesting about restoration, is because we talk about rewetting, and it's not like we're creating a lagoons of water, but we are keeping the water table more stable than it would otherwise be. So the times when we experience greatest wildfires is actually coinciding with these very dry springs that we're getting, and kind of bank holidays, sunny bank holidays is when we're seeing fires happen. And actually, if our peatlands were in a better condition, then it's probably less likely that those fires would be significant, get into the peat. That's where the real damage is done. So what's interesting to me is I think about peatland restoration kind of in a strategic sense now as well, as a kind of tool for fire resistance, and that can be very important in the context of commercial forestry, for example. We've had a huge hill fire in Galloway very recently that got into forestry, and you kind of wonder, were there opportunities or are there areas where we should be restoring those wetland areas, managing water in a different way in terms of habitat, wetland, peatland, fenland, as part of that overall landscape management of that asset, which is forestry. So I think these conversations are going on, and peatland restoration could be very useful for that.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? Sorry, there's one at the back there.
Yeah, I wonder if I can make a connection between what Irina was saying and what Emily's saying. Now, Irina was talking about thinking about health and other people's needs in the years to come. And I think nobody's going to argue with the importance of restoring the peatland environment. We live in an area with below average wages, with low educational attainment, and poor health outcomes. So if our local peatlands get restored over a period of time, what's likely to be in it for local people?
The question is, because I think, bear in mind, people on Zoom can't necessarily hear the questions from the audience, so I have to repeat. So, what's in it for local people with restoration of peatlands?
Yeah, so for me, I'm going around the country training up contractors, consultants, businesses to be able to do this kind of work. So we're seeing people that are maybe have the skills in sort of wind farm construction or hill tracks or forestry, actually being able to diversify into doing peatland restoration. This is actual real life jobs for people that can do the restoration work. And this is going to be increasing exponentially. And this is going to be targeting people in rural areas, which is amazing. So it's another string to these companies' goals. We want them to invest in skills and machines so we can do this. We need more contractors. So there's a big push for that just now. So it will directly relate to jobs and this whole idea of a green recovery, green jobs. But I think also we need to be thinking about some of our most iconic sort of views of Galloway are underpinned by peatlands. It's part of our landscape, and we're thinking more about tourism, sustainable tourism. So you start to understand that actually we need to be looking after our landscape, our wildlands, or could be wildlands, as part of how we connect with people. More people are coming here because of our landscape, so we need to look after it as well. So I think there'll be direct impacts for the local economy, for local people, but hopefully as well, tourism. I personally would love to see peatlands here helping educate people. I would love to see more schools engaging with their local areas. I would love to see local universities coming to Galloway to do their field work rather than going up into the Highlands, that sort of thing as well. So we all start to connect back and understand and be able to work here. We need more peatland scientists. We need more peatland advisors that can go out and actually plan restoration projects as well. So there's a huge kind of growth area, I think.
And in in Lancashire, Sarah's working very close, I think you are as well, with farmers and looking at how they can diversify. So if peatlands are being restored on their land, whether they're tenant farmers or they're the owners of the land, what can they do? And one of them is because of the outcome of Brexit, we don't have to stay in line with some of the EU thinking. So actually, there is a move to pay farmers credits for healthy carbon, like a carbon store credit. But also, like Emily said, there's this kind of what can farmers do also when they're looking to sort of diversify in terms of tourism, and how can they work with that? So the farm that's at the bottom of Pendle Hill has put up a tiny little hut that serves tea and coffee and ice cream, and they make a fortune because so many people pass it. And how Sarah's working with the farmers as well is looking at how sheep are grazing. So they're not stopping that, but they're moving the sheep around more and having fewer sheep. And they're also doing like the restoration of the walls, looking at planting and when they can introduce more wildflower meadows and hedgerows. So I think that there are multiple benefits for a local community, and probably for a more diverse community. So not simply, not only the farmers, but young people who want to go into tourism or leisure or sports or various other things. But I think there's a massive opportunity to actually boost local economy through having a healthy, thriving and functioning landscape.
I think what's interesting as well is, the image I put up first in my presentation, it's about that kind of idea of an undervalued, not valued, horrible kind of area. Actually, we're looking at uplands now because of their value, the carbon value as well. And so suddenly areas will be resourced and supported, possibly not to deliver from a productivity point of view, but it'll be valued in a different way, and that could be carbon. So it kind of offers opportunities possibly to keep more people on the land, rather than walking away from it or not being able to have a viable business working in our rural areas.
Okay, we're moving towards the final section. I'm going to ask Irina to come back on board. Just a quick apology to everyone on Zoom. I'm sort of seeing an issue with sound. I think it's because we all move around a little bit when we're talking. It's unnatural for to stand really still. We're going to resolve that for the next event. I think we'll end up all the presenters will be individually mic'd up. I think we'll solve that. But so apologies to everyone on Zoom who's been a bit indistinct, except we are trying to learn how to do this ourselves as well. So Irina, are you out there? Will you be able to come back and speak to us? Irina? She's in Edinburgh, she's quite a long way away. So hopefully I'll just see if I can wake her up.
There was one question here from somebody saying, is the Pendle Hill project ongoing, Kerry?
Yes and no. I mean, it's a landscape partnership project. Because of COVID, they've had an extension for a year. Is it a no-cost extension? I don't know. It does have an end date, but because it falls within the AONB, it still falls under the care of the area of outstanding natural beauty, Forest of Bowland. Plus, they've been working with the farmers and the landowner who are far more kind of in tune with that landscape now as a peat landscape. Brilliant.
Okay, I think Irina's now woken up. Hopefully she hasn't gone to sleep. And she's going to appear back on our screens. And apparently she's the one that's been the clearest, because she used to be doing a normal Zoom meeting in front of her laptop, as we're trying to be a bit more experimental here. So Irina, would you like to come through, please?
I should be coming through. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, excellent. Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I think, just to add maybe very briefly to what Emily and Kerry were saying in terms of what's in it for the local people, right? I think you mentioned like all of these like really important, all the kind of very practical dimensions of it. And there is also something around, I think for me, in kind of grounding climate change in what's around us, that it's not this issue that is somewhere over here, and kind of learning with and from the peat. I think I find the notion of learning from like other species quite beautiful, than kind of we used to that we are learning from one another quite often, but kind of extending that notion of who can we learn from and who do we deem as kind of legitimate as learning from. And I think as Emily and Carrie have been telling us this evening, we have so much to learn from the Peat itself about life, I think. But I guess what we wanted to do to close this is to have a little discussion in response to the question that I shared at the beginning about what do you feel you could do to ensure that the peat has healthy and livable habitat now and in the future climate. And I saw that people were pasting some answers in the chat already, but yeah, just curious to hear everyone's thoughts, as many of you have peat directly in your neighborhood. That seems like a relevant question to ask, and also just, I guess, to say that we are asking this kind of questions throughout these event series. So each of them is focused on the different species, the different kind of creature, and hoping to kind of gather a sense of like what are those kind of things that people can do to protect and ensure those species, habitats, places have good conditions to live in and flourish in the future climate. So Nick, I think I will be relying on you to kind of facilitate the conversation in the space a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Arena. Yeah, I think sort of the questions are more at an individual level. What do you guys feel that you can do? I think in the Zoom room, if you could maybe just put it into the comments section, and I'll just try and get the camera back up. That'd be really useful because we can then capture that and feed that back through to the adaptation project. And perhaps within this room, if people could maybe put their hands up for ideas of what they can do. Very quiet at the moment, so hopefully they can do something.
I think that is putting down on compost, on previous compost is absolutely.
So the first thing we've got here from Ken, Ranger Ken from Loch Ken. So a bigger shout out to be looking after the loch all year exceptionally well. Just about recognising this mask on. A very obvious thing there: cut down on the use or eradicate the use of peat. Already just discussed earlier with Emily, etc. But there is no reason to use peat in your garden. You've got soil in your garden. Plants done pretty well in soil forever, really. So maybe learn how to look after the soil you've got instead of continually importing peat into the environment. Another one in the back.
Are there any planting projects planned for this part of the world? Like the one that Emily was on there?
This is planting projects that planned going forward. We do have a Peatland Connections project within the Galloway Gelns portfolio being run by the Clarion House Centre. The project officer is in the room on chat. You don't put your hand up and I'll show you the rest of the world, Peatland's officer. It's Jane Murdoch. There you go. Got a red hat there. So she'll be answering all your, getting the community involved with all sorts of Peatland projects going forward. It's been one of those projects which has been affected, I think it's fair to say, by COVID, in that it's very much volunteer based and getting the community together. And now this is our first community event with people in a room for 18 months. So it's going to be difficult getting going, but I mean, it's been great stuff already, getting people out doing things. They're doing some peat bags at the cat stand the other day, and there's more events coming forward. So getting involved is something you can all do.
Mm-hmm. I suppose educate, on how important peat is to friends and people we meet.
Yeah, so someone else just popped in here within the room, capturing. It's actually important for you all to spread the word and educate people with what you know already. Pretty key.
Yeah, that was one of the things with the bags, giving them out, that we were asking people, they say they can keep the bags, but please do pass on that story and pass on that message.
I don't know if you heard that out there, but Kerry's also pointed out that the bags that she was talking about, very critical about passing the message forward all the time. And you take those bags home, people will say to you, what was that bag for? And immediately you've got a story there.
I think that's the crux of it, isn't it? Because we've led such virtual lives. If you think what Irene's first point was, that it was such a physical, empathetic experience that she has her first needs to understand. That's the first concept, that's the impact that then reverberate and physical that.
I think within the room there's quite a big shout out for the bags, and I think what someone else said here is that the virtual world we've lived in for 18 months, nearly 2 years now, we're going to have to come out of this somehow and start learning how to communicate better in person and go out and do things like this. I mean, we've got to do it safely, but we've got to go out and start getting involved in these volunteer activities with other people. And actually, often it's in a very safe environment because you're outdoors and it's pretty windy normally around here as well. So the chances of being sort of like penned in like we are here are quite limited. Does there have any more comments from the audience?
Maybe just another prompt from, oh, sorry, is there someone?
No, carry on, Irina.
Yeah, just a prompt, as we were saying, about the different ways that we are anticipating that climate is and will be changing in the nearest kind of like decade and well, hundreds of years in Scotland. Is the warmer, like hotter and drier summers. And I wonder if people maybe have thoughts on what that means for the peats in terms of, like, for example, increased risks of like fires, or that there will be much more kind of, yeah, exposed and at risk to burning. If there's anything concrete that people can do to prevent that from happening, or if it is happening, what are the ways to kind of deal with that?
Do we have a comment coming from the audience on that point?
Level, I talked so much today about how they should deal with their concrete flooring in their kitchen in relation to the flooding that happens in the bath. Someone disbelieving how far up she is in the camp and that impact. That's a really easy simple.
I think so. Someone here within the audience, we have to work out how to do this because we've got sort of different conversations going on. So chat amongst yourselves in the Zoom room as well. But so much about the relationship between peat quality and water and how related we are to water. Emily, I think you're going to come in on that.
Yes. So one of the things we want to do with Peatland Connections is to think about water quality. And actually, we have some very, very acidic water catchments in Dumfries and Galloway. And it's a whole host of things going on. But part of that story is drained peatlands, deep peats. So where we get very drained, very degraded peatlands, we're seeing more acidic waters. And we have done pH sampling in some water courses, and we've measured something like pH 3.2, like crazy acidic.
That combined with the high levels of the farmland, so we've got some of the most beautiful landscape and some of the most polluted water. So there's a potential to connect.
Yeah.
Things that people do know about those.
Yeah. So that idea of connecting, upstream land management to water. So it's not only a kind of water regulation. We often think about peatlands, block up your ditches, you're going to reduce downstream flooding. Well, potentially, but actually it's the water quality that we're really interested in, pH particularly, and the impact it has on our wild fisheries with salmon and trout. So we've worked quite a lot with Galloway Fishes Trust, and they're doing amazing work monitoring water quality in and around peatland areas, and that's actually directly informing our peatland management plans as well. And we're working really closely with Forestry and Land Scotland, who are taking all this on board. They've been brilliant with it. But what we want to do with Peatland Connections is to get more sampling done, and we need volunteers to come on board and help us do that. So we want to have some sort of citizen science water quality monitoring project that will feed into land management plans, hopefully engage schools as well. It could be part of their science projects, for example. Well, yeah, absolutely, because it's an ecosystem that they could, I think we talk about, the rainforest, the Amazon, and actually peat bogs in Galloway could be used as an example as well. We just don't really talk about it in that way. Yeah. Exactly. So no, water will be part of our Peatland Connections project.
Emily, stay there. It's quite useful having you quite close to the microphone. How do people get involved with Peatland Connections? So everyone is in this room is fairly local. People out on Zoom land, some will be local, some won't be, but we're still interested in all of those people, aren't we? So how do they get in touch?
So over the next 2 years, another 2 years for Peatland Connections, is we want to be running, I hate using the word workshop, but I suppose will be workshops, but outdoors. We want to be understanding what everybody wants to see happen with the peatlands and for what reasons. And that's everybody from local communities to the fisheries managers, to the forester, to the farmer. We want to understand what they want to get from peatlands. And so we'll be hosting lots and lots of these workshops to kind of gather this evidence. And we want to come up with a a land use decision tool, something that will actually bring people into the land use decisions that are ongoing. So it's not just the kind of normal people feeding into them. There's been a feeling for a long time it's actually quite hard to engage in some of the consultation processes. For example, some of the forestry consultation processes out there. We want to equip people to be able to go and respond to these consultations so people feel part of the decision making. And at the end of this project, we're going to be gathering this information in lots of different ways. We're going to be engaging people in lots of different ways. We're going to be using arts and music, culture, science, citizen science, water quality monitoring, loads of things, and we're going to bring it all together in a big exhibition that we hope actually to try and take to Scottish Parliament as well. So there'll be lots and lots of things coming up. Now that we're coming hopefully out of the COVID restrictions, Jane will be organising events. And so really check out, if you Google Peatland Connections, you'll go straight to our webpage and you'll see what's happening.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to actually shut down the Zoom end of this pretty shortly because people are starting to leave the room. So anyway, but if you'd like to all unmute yourselves and say thank you very much in a traditional way to our speakers, and everyone in this room could do the same, please.